Hey, this video is going to cover topic 3.4, potential problems with sampling. All right, so our objective is to identify potential sources of bias in sampling methods. So let's first talk about the word bias. Okay. So when we use the word bias in statistics, we're usually referring to some sort of systematic favoring of some responses over others. So this video, I'm going to cover like 5 or 6 different sources or types of bias. And we're going to begin with the voluntary response bias. So when a sample is comprised entirely of volunteers or people who choose to participate, the sample will typically not be representative of the population. And just some examples from our everyday life would be Amazon reviews, right, which is completely voluntary. You see in this picture here, we have a sample of 6 reviews, but they're mostly 5-star or 1-star, okay? And so what this tells us is that people who have really strong opinions are the ones who usually volunteer to respond. Okay, either they really, really love the product or they really, really hate it. People who are in the middle don't usually feel motivated enough to respond to a survey that's voluntary. Okay. And then here, this one on the bottom I thought was pretty funny, Yelp reviews. So I looked up our high school on Yelp and we're rated as a 2-star school, which again leads you to believe that it's really people who have strong opinions that have probably left their Yelp reviews. So maybe students or parents who had a pretty bad experience are the ones more motivated to leave a review. Okay, so we shouldn't think of these reviews as representative of the whole population because again, it's only people with strong opinions and for the most part negative opinions who are the ones that respond to voluntary surveys. Okay, the next type of bias is undercoverage bias. So when part of the population has a reduced chance of being included in the sample, again, the sample will not be representative of the population, right? So there's this common theme here is that bias usually occurs when our sample does not accurately represent our population. All right, so this is a picture of President Truman holding up a newspaper like the day after the election, right? And it was the Chicago Tribune who ran a headline that Dewey defeated Truman. Okay. Now the reason why they ran that headline was because they were relying on the results of polls, right? And they had to, the newspaper had to go to print prior to all the districts reporting back. Okay, so they had to go with the results of the poll, and the poll was flawed, right? So the poll that they took the results from did their poll over the telephone, okay? And back in 1948, right, not a whole lot of people had telephones. It was usually mostly wealthy people who had telephones, and at that time, wealthier people tended to lean more Republican, okay? So due to the fact that they were only polling over the phone, they had a greater chance of reaching Republican voters and a reduced chance of reaching Democrat voters, okay? Which is why their poll results were so off. Okay, non-response bias. This happens when individuals who are chosen for the sample, either we cannot collect the data from them or they refuse to provide any sort of data or response. And had we collected data from them, their responses may differ a lot from those who we did collect data from. Okay. So non-response bias happens a lot with telephone surveys or like door-to-door surveys or mail-in surveys. Okay. You might get called in the middle of your evening dinner to participate in a survey, but you don't have the time, you're busy, you're in the middle of eating with your family, or a pollster may come to your door and ask who you're going to vote for this election. You might not want to divulge that information, right? So anytime we attempt to collect data and we aren't able to collect it either because the person can't be reached, maybe they don't pick up their phone, maybe they don't answer their door, or maybe they just flat out refuse, right? We get this thing called non-response bias. So again, the results that we do collect might not be representative of the whole population, because we know that there's a chunk there that we didn't collect data from where we actually should have, right? They were selected and they didn't respond. All right, so this next one is titled response bias, and we're going to break it up into two parts. So the first part says the result of problems in the data gathering instrument or process. All right, and we're going to tie this back to another election result. This is the 2000 election. Okay, so this was Bush versus Gore, and it really came down to some votes in Florida that determined the election result. Okay, and so what happened was there was this one county in Florida, Palm Beach, and they had a very unique ballot. It was called the butterfly ballot. So if you look in the picture up here on the top right, you can see that there are lists of candidates on the left and lists of candidates on the right. And there's one strip, that yellow strip down the middle, where you, I think, are supposed to punch out who you want to vote for. Okay. And so it was a little confusing because people who may have wanted to vote for Gore may have punched the second hole, but that really was a response for Pat Buchanan. Okay, and really what they should have punched is the third hole. Okay, so it's a kind of a goofy ballot, right? And so when you go back and look at the data, right, and you look at the number of votes that Pat Buchanan got from Palm Beach, he got an astounding number of votes from Palm Beach County. This would be considered an outlier, right? And the reason why is because probably a lot of people intended to vote for Gore and they punched the wrong hole. They punched the hole for Pat Buchanan. Okay, so there was definitely a flaw in that data gathering instrument, or that butterfly ballot. All right, so the second part of response bias is when we have questions that are confusing or leading questions and self-reported responses. Okay. And so I have a bunch of cartoon clips that illustrate some of these scenarios. So the first one is Calvin and Hobbes. I forget who is who, but the kid is filling out a survey on chewing gum that was just a survey in a magazine. And he just responds with a bunch of goofy answers, right? He spends $500 on gum. He was 43 years old. His favorite flavor is garlic and curry. And then you can see here, he just loves messing with the data. So he's intentionally lying on this survey just for the fun of it, just because he can. The second comic clip is Hagar the Horrible. So the king is conducting a survey. How do you feel about paying taxes? And then they zoom out and you see all these goons here, right, that are, I guess, trying to bully or intimidate the person into responding a certain way. And then the last cartoon is the Wizard of Id. Again, it has to do with a king conducting a poll. How would you rate the king's job performance? And the options are he's doing a good job, an outstanding job, or a terrific job. Okay, and then I think I know who's paying for this poll. So here, right, it's definitely the wording of the question is leaning you towards certain responses and leading you away from other responses, or just not even giving you the option of other responses. Okay. So another place where we see a lot of response bias is when it comes to surveys about sensitive topics, like drug use or alcohol use or sexual activity, those sorts of things, right? So a lot of times people, even though the survey might be anonymous, they still don't feel like being honest, and so they could lie or not give accurate responses just because of the fear of somebody finding out their answer and tying it back to them. So that would be another example of response bias, people lying or giving inaccurate answers to survey questions. Okay, and then we have, I think this is the last one, non-random sampling methods. Okay. So samples chosen by convenience or voluntary response introduce potential bias because they do not use chance to select the individuals. Okay. Now we already covered voluntary response at the very beginning, so let's talk about convenience sampling. Okay. So this is when you select people who are easiest to reach. like your neighbors, your family, your friends. Okay. The problem with that is that those people are probably not representative of the whole population. Okay. So again, this leads to this problem of, okay, I've got this sample of data, but does it really represent the entire population? And so if you use a convenience sample or you use volunteers, it does not lead to fair representation of the whole population. Another classic example of a convenience sample is someone doing a survey about cafeteria food, and so they stand in front of the cafeteria and survey people as they walk in and out of the cafeteria. Well, the problem there is that the people you're going to encounter are people who eat cafeteria food, and so they're more likely to enjoy it or prefer it, whereas people who don't prefer cafeteria food probably aren't going to be anywhere near the cafeteria. Okay, so it leads to bias or systematically favoring positive responses over negative responses. All right, thanks for watching this video.